Settle in. Get comfortable. Sometimes the thing that changes everything was there the whole time, standing right beside you, handing you the morning briefing. Chapter 1. The 11th Year. Felicity was halfway through the Eastern Border analysis when the heat arrived. She had been doing this for 11 years, 4,000 mornings at this table, marking positions, reading data, making recommendations that shaped the defense of 9 territories. She knew the Eastern Border the way she knew her own handwriting. She could present these numbers in her sleep. She had presented them with a fever once, and with a cracked rib twice, and neither time had anyone in the room noticed, because her voice never changed. Her voice changed. Mid-sentence. Mid-word. A heat from somewhere low and internal, like a furnace door swinging open in a room she had not known her body contained. Her vision sharpened until the grain of the oak table was visible in crystalline detail. Her hearing opened until she could count heartbeats. Dennis's at 3 seats to her left, elevated as usual, and then the one at the head of the table, the one she had never consciously tracked before, steady and deep, and doing something to her pulse that she could not name. She smelled something. Not the room, not the stone and tallow and old parchment she had been smelling for a decade. Something specific, coming from the head of the table. Pine resin and warm stone, and a thread of something underneath. Green and sharp and alive, like a forest floor after rain. She had always known his scent. She had filed it under conference room. It was not conference room. It was him. It had always been him. "Finally," said Charity. Charity had been a quiet wolf. 30 years of low, sardonic murmur at the back of Felicity's consciousness, dry observations filed under instinct, dismissed, moved past. Not anymore. Charity said, finally, the way someone says it when they have been standing at a locked door for 3 decades and someone has finally handed them the key. 11 years. 11 years I have been saying him, and you have been hearing heartburn. Felicity's hands were shaking. She could feel it, the tremor in her fingers, the heat climbing her spine, her scent shifting in real time. Something new underneath the cedar paper and cold iron she had always carried. Something warm and sweet. Honey. She could smell it on herself, and she could not stop it, and every wolf in the room could smell it too. She lost her place. For the first time in 11 years, she lost her place in a briefing. The numbers scattered. The sentence she had been building fell apart mid-clause. She stood at the head of the table with her mouth open and nothing coming out, and the room was looking at her, and she could feel the moment they understood, one by one, the recognition moving through the council like a wave. The widening eyes, the shifted postures, the involuntary territorial recalibrations of men reclassifying her from colleague to something else. Something other. Alderman Dennis was the first to speak. This changes her designation. 4 words, perfectly neutral. The kind of sentence that sounded like governance and tasted like an ending. The room turned to the king. Eldon Moonsong was sitting at the head of the table with his pen in his hand, and he was not moving. Not in a human way. He was still the way a predator goes still when the landscape shifts. Every resource rerouted, every instinct firing. The body locked in place by the sheer effort of not doing the thing it wants to do. His eyes were dark brown. At the edges, bleeding inward like ink in water, a ring of deep amber. "Hours," Anthony said. Not quiet this time. Not the whisper Eldon had been mistaking for professional admiration for 11 years. The word hit him like a door opening into a room he had been standing outside his entire life. And the room was full of warm honey and cedar paper, and the particular way she held a briefing, and the particular way she looked when she was right, and the particular way she smelled right now, which was like everything he had ever wanted and could not have. And she was standing 6 feet away, and the honey was everywhere. And Anthony was saying hours and meaning it with every cell of a wolf who had waited 11 years and was done waiting. Eldon's hand gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. His jaw clenched so tight the muscle stood out like a cable. And then he spoke. "It changes nothing." His voice was level, controlled, the managed version, held in place by what looked like enormous effort. "The Eastern Border briefing will continue in the morning. Brooks retains full authority over the 7th Patrol redeployment. Dismissed." The room did not move. "Dismissed," he said again, quieter. The amber was bright in his eyes, and his hand was white on the table, and the honey scent was filling the room, and he was not going to let the room see what it was doing to him. He was going to sit here and hold the table and dismiss the council and treat this as administrative, because that was the only thing he could offer her right now, the refusal to make it an event. The council filed out. Dennis hesitated. Eldon looked at him. Whatever Dennis saw in that look, the amber, the locked jaw, the very controlled breathing of a man whose wolf was screaming, was enough. Dennis left. Felicity was still standing at the table. Her hands were shaking. Her parchments were scattered. She could not remember the last time she had dropped a document in this room. She could not remember the last time she had lost her place in a sentence. She was standing at the table where she had built her career, her identity, her entire adult self, and the ground underneath all of it had shifted, and she did not know what she was standing on anymore. She looked at Eldon. He looked at her. The room was empty, and the honey was everywhere, and the amber was in his eyes, and neither of them spoke. She left, not with her back straight and her parchments squared. She left the parchments on the table. She walked out, and her hands were shaking, and she did not know where she was going, and Charity said, "Breathe," and she breathed, and the corridor was cold, and she was something she had not been an hour ago, and she did not know what it meant. Eldon sat in the empty council chamber. The honey was still in the room. It was on the chair where she had been sitting, on the parchments she had left scattered on the table, on the air itself, clinging to the stone walls as if the room were trying to hold on to her. He breathed it in. He could not help breathing it in. The honey and the cedar paper and the cold iron underneath. The scent of a woman who had been precise and controlled, and his for 11 years, and who had just walked out of his council chamber with her hands shaking and her parchments dropped. And he had seen her face, and the face was not composure. The face was a woman whose floor had disappeared. "Hours," Anthony said, and then, quieter, "She is afraid. She has never been afraid. Not once. Not in 11 years. Not during the Grey March flood, and not during the Eastern ambush, and not during the supply crisis in the 4th year when she worked for 30 hours straight and did not sleep. She has never been afraid. She is afraid now." Eldon looked at the chair she had been sitting in. The parchments were still there. The border analysis, page 9, supplementary data. He could see her handwriting. He could read it upside down from across the table because he had taught himself to read her handwriting upside down, and he had not asked himself why. He was going to ask himself why now. The honey was everywhere, warm, persistent, like sunlight in a room he had been keeping dark. It was doing something to his chest, to his breathing, to the architecture of control he had been maintaining for 11 years. The careful distance, the correct surname, the managed version of himself that sat across from her 4,000 mornings and never said the word that Anthony had been saying since the first day. He picked up her parchments. He squared them. He set them in the folio, the way she would have set them if she had not been shaking. And he placed the folio on the table where she would find it in the morning. And then he sat in the empty room with the honey on the air and the amber in his eyes and made a decision. He was going to stand. Not metaphorically, not politically. He was going to stand for her the way she had stood at this table for 11 years. Consistently, specifically, in every room that tried to reclassify her. He was going to refuse to let a council of inherited seats tell him that the most competent person he had ever met was disqualified by biology. And he was going to do it not because she was his mate, but because she was right. And she had been right 47 times more than him, and he had been counting. Chapter 2. The Anchor. She sat on the edge of her bed with her hands in her lap, and she did not know what she was. This was new. She had always known what she was. Beta, strategist, the Alpha King's right hand, the woman who ran the eastern border and held briefings, and carried her own document case up mountain ridges in hailstorms. She had known what she was since she was 17, when she presented, and she had built everything on it. 11 years of mornings at the table, 11 years of competence, 11 years of being the person the room turned to when the data was complicated and the stakes were real. Now the room had turned to Dennis. And Dennis had said, "This changes her designation," as if designation were the only thing holding her to the table. "It is not," Charity said. Firm. The sardonic register stripped back to the truth underneath. The designation is not why you are good at this. You are why you are good at this. The wolf does not make the strategist. The strategist was always you. Then why does it feel like the floor is gone? Because you built your whole floor out of one material, and the material just shifted. But the floor is still there. You just cannot see it yet. She was shaking. Still. An hour later, and her hands were still trembling, and the honey scent was on her skin, and she could not turn it off, and it smelled like someone else, like a version of herself she had not met, a version that was soft where she had always been precise, warm where she had always been controlled. She did not know this version. She did not trust this version. She had spent the hour thinking about the room, the way the council had looked at her when it happened, not with hostility, not most of them, but with the particular recalibration that was worse than hostility. The moment when she stopped being the strategist and became the Omega. She had seen it happen in real time. 11 years of briefings and data and correct calls, and in 10 seconds, every face in the room had reclassified her, as if the competence had been a function of the designation and not the other way around. "That is not true," Charity said. "You know that is not true." Do I? Do I actually know that? Or did the beta designation give me authority that I am now going to lose, and the competence was just me performing inside a structure that held me up? Felicity, you held the Grey March crossing with 9 soldiers and a broken supply line. You did not hold it because you had an iron cuff on your wrist. You held it because you are smarter than the river and more stubborn than the mountain, and you had better data than the flood. She looked at the cuff. She had earned it at 21, 3 years of field service, a qualifying review, a ceremony she barely remembered because she had been thinking about the patrol rotation she needed to file that afternoon. She had never been sentimental about the cuff. It was a tool. It was a credential. It said she belonged in the room. She did not know if she still belonged in the room. The knock came at 8:45. She knew it was him before she opened the door. Pine resin and warm stone, sharp through the wood. She could track his scent through walls now, could feel the direction of it, the distance, could tell he had been standing in the corridor for nearly a minute before he knocked. He had hesitated. The king had hesitated outside her door. She opened it. He was standing there with a leather folio under his arm and his jaw set and the amber very carefully held at the edges of his eyes. Not gone, just managed. He was wearing the charcoal tunic he wore for working days, not formal sessions, and his collar was wrong on the left side, the way it was always wrong, the way she had been straightening it for 400 mornings. "I need your assessment on the spring patrol rotation," he said, "by Thursday." He had come to her quarters to ask for a work deliverable. At 8:45 on the morning after her life had rearranged itself, he was standing in her doorway treating her as his beta. because she was his beta, and nothing about that had changed in his mind. And the proof was that he was here, with a folio, asking about patrols, with his collar wrong. She stared at him. Something in her throat tightened. Not tears, the pressure before tears. The thing the body does when it encounters unexpected steadiness. "May I come in?" he said. She stepped aside. He came in. The room was small, beta quarters, practical. The room of a woman who worked 18-hour days and slept in the gaps. He was very large in it. The pine resin filled the space immediately, mixing with the honey that was on her skin and in the air, and in the sheets, and in every surface she had touched since yesterday. She watched him register it. The slight intake of breath, the jaw tightening, the amber brightening for 1 second before he controlled it. His hand found the edge of her desk and gripped it. "The honey," Anthony said. "The honey. She smells like cedar paper and iron and honey, and we should, the proximity is, the optimal distance for this particular scent concentration is approximately 0 inches, and we are currently at 6 feet, which is structurally unsound." Eldon set the folio on her desk. He turned to face her. He saw her hands. The shaking. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap, and they were trembling, and she was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face in 11 years. Not competence, not composure, not the dry precision that made her the best strategist he had ever worked with. Something underneath all of that. Something that looked like a woman who had woken up in a house she had built and found the walls in different places. He sat down. Not in the desk chair. He pulled it around and sat directly across from her, close enough that their knees were nearly touching. Close enough that the honey was everywhere, and Anthony was losing coherence. And he sat there anyway, because she was shaking, and that mattered more than the scent. And more than Anthony, and more than every territorial instinct his wolf was firing at him. "Brooks. I lost my place." Her voice was quiet, not controlled. "In the briefing. I have never lost my place." "I know. I dropped the parchments. I know. I do not know what I am," she said it looking at her hands, not at him. The admission cost her something visible. A tightening around her mouth, a rigidity in her shoulders, the deliberate steadiness of a woman forcing herself to say a thing she would never normally say. "I have been beta for 13 years. I built everything on it. And yesterday, every person in that room looked at me and saw something else. Not the strategist, not the person who held the Gray March crossing. The Omega." She paused. What if they were only listening to me because of the designation? What if the cuff was doing the work and I was just standing inside it? "Look at me." She looked at him. His dark brown eyes with the amber at the edges, his jaw set. His hands on his knees, open, not gripping. "You identified the Jackwater vulnerability 6 months before anyone on the council," he said. "Not because you had a cuff, because you read the survey data that nobody else read, and you cross-referenced it with the rainfall tables from the previous 3 years. And you were the only person in the room who thought to do that. You held the Gray March crossing when I could not get reinforcements there in time, with 9 soldiers and a supply line that was 3 days late. You redesigned the 7th patrol rotation and reduced border incidents by 30% in the first year. You are the reason the eastern border exists in its current configuration." He paused. The amber was steady. "None of that is a designation. All of that is you. The cuff is a piece of iron. You are the reason the piece of iron means anything." Something in her chest cracked. Not broke, cracked open, the way a door cracks open when the pressure behind it has been building and someone finally pushes. "I did not respect you because you were beta," he said. Quieter now, the real mode, stripped all the way down. "I respected you because you were right, consistently. For 11 years. His jaw clenched. "I have been keeping count. Since your 3rd year. You are ahead by 47. You have been counting. Yes, for 8 years. Yes. How often I am right. Versus how often I am right. You are ahead, significantly. And you filed this under professional benchmarking. The silence between them was warm and full of honey and pine, and the specific tension of a man who had just admitted something he had filed under professional benchmarking for 8 years, and was only now hearing how it sounded. That was not professional benchmarking, Anthony said. That was devotion. We have been devoted. For 8 years. Professionally. With intensity. No. Just devoted. The word is devoted. I reorganized the seating chart in your second year, Eldon said. I told myself it was for acoustics. Your hearing is perfect. Yes. That was not for acoustics. No. Something in her face shifted. Not composure returning, something else. Something that looked like a woman finding her footing, not on the old floor but on the new one, the one that had the same shape but different material. He was sitting in her quarters, telling her she was right 47 more times than he was, and that he had rearranged furniture to be closer to her, and the ground under her feet was starting to feel solid again. Not because the designation had changed back, because he was here, and he was treating her like the person she had always been, and the person she had always been was still here. The spring patrol rotation, she said. Thursday. I will have it by Wednesday. He stood. He picked up the folio. He walked to the door. At the threshold he stopped, and she watched his hand grip the door frame, the knuckles whitening, the scar across his nose catching the light. And he breathed in once, the honey filling his lungs, and he did not turn around. Brooks. Moonsong. You are the same person you were on Monday. The council chamber does not decide that. A charter does not decide that. He paused. I decide that. And I decided it 11 years ago. He left. The corridor took his scent with him, slowly, the pine resin fading from warm to ambient to gone. She sat on her bed and held the iron cuff on her left wrist, and she was still shaking, but the shaking was different now. Not the tremor of ground disappearing, but the tremor of ground arriving, new and uncertain and built on something she had not expected, which was the specific, devastating, completely unprofessional devotion of a man who had been counting her wins for 8 years and calling it benchmarking. He counted, Charity said. He sat in that room for 8 years counting every time you were right and writing it down and telling himself it was governance. That man has been in love with you since your 3rd year, and he filed it under acoustics. Felicity held the iron cuff and looked at the door and felt something that was not insecurity anymore. It was the beginning of something else, something warm, something that smelled like pine resin. Chapter 3. The Charter. The next 3 days were a lesson in the difference between the king's authority and the council's opinion. Dennis filed a formal petition invoking Section 14, rank required matching biological designation. He filed it with the confidence of a man who believed the charter was on his side. Eldon read it in the council chamber with Felicity at the table, where he had insisted she sit, in her usual seat, at his right hand. The Crown's position, Eldon said without looking up from the petition, is that rank is determined by service, not designation. I will not be revisiting this. My veto is entered. Dennis straightened. The charter is clear, Your Majesty. The charter, Eldon said, setting down the petition, was written by men who never imagined this situation, because it has not occurred in a century. I am not going to govern by the limitations of their imagination. That, Anthony said, with tremendous satisfaction. Say it again, louder, with the jaw thing. The jaw thing is very effective. Felicity watched him. She had watched him handle council opposition 1,000 times. The managed mode, the level voice, the careful political calibration of a king who governed through consensus. This was not that. This was the real mode. Terse, direct. The mode she heard in late-night strategy sessions when the candles burned low and he stopped performing composure and started saying what he actually thought. He was using the real mode in front of the full council, and he was using it for her. Something in her chest did a thing she did not have a strategic framework for. The veto held. Dennis could object, but the king's authority was constitutional. The council existed as counterbalance, not sovereign. They could advise, petition, delay, but on matters of rank and appointment, the crown was final. But Eldon did not stop at the veto. That evening she found him in his study with the charter open on the desk. Not Section 14, the whole document. Every article, every amendment, every addendum from 140 years of governance. He was reading it the way she read patrol data, line by line, looking for the structural logic underneath. "What are you doing?" she said from the doorway. "Reading. You have read the charter. I have cited the charter. I have governed by the charter. I have never read it." He looked up. The amber was at the edges, the firelight catching it. "You would have read it. From the first day. You memorized it in your first year." That is because nobody expected a 19-year-old beta to know the jurisdictional basis of the lower staircase. The thing at the corner of his mouth, the almost smile. The one she had been seeing for 11 years and had filed under professional rapport and was only now understanding was not professional rapport. He looked back at the charter. Dennis's seat is inherited. His father held it, his grandfather. 3 generations, no qualifying review. Alderman Grant, appointed by my father as a political favor. Alderman Harvey, appointed to settle a trade dispute in the 4th year. Half this council is here because of who they know, not what they have done. He paused. You are the only person at that table who earned your seat through demonstrated competence, and you are the one they are trying to remove. She came into the room. She sat in her chair, the one beside the hearth, the one she had sat in for 1,000 evenings while they argued about borders and trade and the 17 ways a council vote could go sideways. The honey was in the room. She could see him managing it. The deliberate breathing, the jaw clenching, the way his hand tightened on the charter when she sat down. The scent was doing something to him that the managed mode could barely contain, and she could see the cost of the containment, and the fact that he was containing it, that he was sitting in her scent and holding the line because the conversation mattered more than the wanting, was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her. Pine resin, Charity observed. Pine resin and warm stone, and the particular discipline of a man who is losing his mind and filing it under governance. I want you to know that I am updating the catalog. He is entry number 1. Category: devastating. You are going to reform the council, she said. I am going to reform the council. Not for me. He looked at her. The amber was steady. For the principle. You are the proof that the principle is broken. You are not the reason. This was the thing. This was the thing that made the ground solid under her feet. Not his protection, his precision. He was not rescuing her. He was not making a grand gesture because his wolf was screaming and her scent was driving him to distraction. He was reading the charter because the charter was wrong, and she was the evidence, and he was a king who governed by evidence, and the evidence was sitting in the chair beside his hearth, smelling like honey, and holding her iron cuff, and looking at him with an expression that was no longer insecure. The Jack crisis arrived 2 days later. A rider in dust-covered leather dropped a sealed message on the strategy room table at 7:30 in the morning. Eldon read it. His face did the thing, the managed version clicking into place, the political mask. Lord Jack is testing the Grey March boundary. 3 incursions in the last week. He is requesting a formal audience to discuss territorial revision. The room went quiet. 2 council observers looked at Eldon. One of them, Grant, the one who owed his seat to a political favor, glanced at Felicity with the specific hesitation of a man deciding whether the Omega should be consulted on military matters. Eldon did not glance at anyone. He looked at Felicity. Brooks, assessment. She stepped to the map. She had been managing the eastern border for 7 years. She knew Jack, his troop strength, his supply lines, the fact that his river access claim predated the current charter by 40 years and had genuine legal standing. You could not dismiss it. You had to outmaneuver it. She spoke for 6 minutes without notes. She named the 3 advisors Jack would bring and their negotiation patterns. She identified his leverage point, the spring melt raising the Grey March ford depth, making his crossing viable for the first time in 2 years, and the window in which that leverage expired, which was 11 days. She proposed the response. Hold the 7th Patrol on the ridge. Redirect the 3rd to the southern water access as a visible show of strength. Send a counteroffer conceding the water rights he actually wanted, which were agricultural, not territorial, while closing the boundary question permanently through a revised access treaty. The distinction between what people need and what they ask for was the foundation of every negotiation she had ever won. She had won most of them. She handled it standing at the map, with her hands steady and her voice level, and the honey in her scent filling the room, and every person present watching to see if the Omega could still do the job. She could do the job. She had always been able to do the job, and the ground that had been missing for a week was back under her feet, solid, real, built not from a designation, but from the specific competence of a woman who knew the eastern border the way she knew her own breathing. Eldon watched her. The honey reached him from across the table, warm, persistent, threading through the cedar paper and the iron. Anthony was speaking in fragments. Hours. She is standing at a map, being right again. 48 times now. The count requires revision. Also, we cannot breathe. The breathing is compromised. The honey is, she is, the map, the competence. We are going to need a moment, and by moment, I mean the rest of our lives. Something in Eldon's face shifted. Not the managed version, the thing underneath, specific, devastating, private. The expression of a man watching someone do the thing he had loved about them for 11 years, and the love was no longer filed under benchmarking, and the honey was no longer filed under conference room, and there was nothing left to file it under except what it was. Implement it, he said. Full authority. Grant opened his mouth. Eldon looked at him. Whatever Grant saw, the amber, the jaw, the real mode, was enough. Grant closed his mouth. The boundary held by evening. She found him in the corridor after dark, both of them working late, 11 years of shared evenings. She was coming from the strategy room with her document case and the patrol rotation he had asked for, finished by Wednesday as she had told him, because she was still her, and being her meant delivering early. He was coming from the charter, which he had been reading every evening for a week, marking sections, building the case for reform. They met at the junction where the East Wing met the Central Hall, and they stopped. The torchlight, the honey, the pine. The corridor was full of both of them at once, and the sense had been getting stronger every day, the omega and alpha layers deepening. She could see his pulse in his throat, fast, visible in the torchlight, the heartbeat of a man who had walked into his own scent mixed with hers and was trying to keep walking. His hands were at his sides, and his fingers had curled and uncurled twice since she appeared. She could feel the bond between them. Not complete, not yet, but present, like a rope pulled taut in the dark, connecting her chest to his. She had been feeling it for days, the constant low pull, the way her body oriented toward whatever room he was in, the way the honey in her scent rose whenever he was close. She had been filing it under biology. It was not biology. Biology did not keep ink jars stocked for 9 years. He was looking at her the way he had been looking at her since the presentation. Not the managed version, not the political assessment, but something underneath that was raw and specific and completely unprofessional. She had never been looked at like this. She had been respected, deferred to, occasionally feared. She had never been looked at by a man who was visibly falling apart and visibly choosing not to look away. "You smell like honey," he said, quietly. The real mode. Cedar paper and cold iron and honey. You have always smelled like cedar and iron. The honey is new. His jaw clenched. "I want you to know that the honey is making it very difficult to form sentences. It has been making it very difficult to form sentences for approximately 9 days. I am managing it, but I want you to know that it is being managed, not absent. I know. You know. I have watched you grip the edge of the map table every time I stand within 4 feet of you for the last week. I have watched your jaw clench 17 times in a single briefing. I know." 17, Anthony said faintly. "She has been counting us the way we have been counting her." This is. I do not have a category for this. The benchmarking is mutual. They were standing 3 feet apart. The torch flame between them threw their shadows long and tangled on the stone floor. His hands were at his sides, fingers in the architecture of a decision, and her heart was beating in her throat and against her ribs and in the tips of her fingers. And Charity was saying, "If you do not kiss him right now, I am going to make something involuntary happen to your left knee, and you will have to explain it." And the corridor was dark and gold and warm and close. "I have been wanting to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "When you reorganized the seating chart, the second year, was it really not for acoustics?" "You know it was not." "I want to hear you say it." He took a step closer, 2 feet now. She could feel the heat of him. She could smell the pine resin as if she were standing in a forest, as if the stone corridor had dissolved and there was nothing in the world except his scent and the torchlight and the 2-foot gap that 11 years of professionalism had maintained and that was now held together by nothing except habit. His voice when he spoke was low and rough and not managed at all. "I moved you closer because I could not bear to have you farther away. I have kept your ink in my desk for 9 years because the idea of you running out and having to leave the room to find more was intolerable. I have stayed late every evening for 11 years because you stay late, and I would rather sit in a room watching you organize maps than sit in any other room doing anything else." He paused. That was not benchmarking. That was not acoustics. That was not professional admiration. She stepped into him. She put her hands on his jaw, both sides, thumbs at the hinge where the muscle had been locked for days, and she kissed him. Not tentatively, not with the careful distance of a woman finding her footing. She kissed him the way she was learning to do everything now, with the full weight of who she was, both versions, the beta who built a career and the omega who was building something new on top of it, and neither one apologizing for the other. He kissed her back. His hands came to her waist, then her back, and the restraint he had been holding, the managed breathing, the controlled proximity, the disciplined containment of a man whose wolf was dismantling his composure from the inside, broke. Not violently, completely. He pulled her close, and the pine and the honey merged, and Anthony said, "Ours," with the devastated certainty of a wolf who had waited 11 years and was finally allowed to mean it. "There," Charity said, "right there. That is what I have been trying to tell you since you were 19. That feeling. That is not indigestion. That is not stress. That is not conference room. That is home." She pulled back, forehead against his, both breathing. "You have a charter to finish," she said. "I know. Your collar is crooked." She straightened it, her fingers at his throat, his pulse under her thumb, fast and hard. She let her hand stay 1 second too long. Then she stepped back, and he watched her go, and his hand went to his collar where her fingers had been, and Anthony said, "Hours." And Eldon did not argue because there was no argument left. Chapter 4. The Table. He dissolved the council on a Monday, he told her first. Sunday evening, in his study, with the fire burning and the charter open on the desk, and the honey and pine between them like a third presence in the room. He had spent 2 weeks reading, marking, building the case. Not for her, for the principal. She was the proof. She was not the reason. 12 seats, he said, merit-based, qualifying criteria. Demonstrated capability and service record. Designation is not a factor. He looked at her. The Omega from the Eastern Patrol, India. 8 years of field service. She gets a seat. The captain from the 3rd Patrol who held the Grey March crossing. The trade negotiator who closed the Southern Valley Agreement. People who earned their places. Dennis? Retired, with a commendation for 40 years of service. He earned his seat the old way. He was wrong about yours. She looked at him, the firelight on his face, the amber in his eyes, warm and steady, not hidden. He had stopped hiding the amber 3 days ago. After the kiss, after the corridor, after the moment when the managed mode had finally dissolved and the real Eldon had surfaced and stayed. "You are not doing this because of me," she said. "I am doing this because the charter was broken before you presented. You made it visible. There is a difference." She reached across the space between the chairs. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm, large, the scar on his knuckle rough against her palm. She held it, and he held hers, and the fire cracked, and the honey and pine blended between them, and Anthony said, "Ours," very quietly. And Charity said nothing, because Charity was learning that some moments did not need commentary. Monday morning, the council chamber. She walked through the palace, and the palace was different. Not the stone, not the corridors, the people. She passed faces she knew from the border command, young officers she had trained, logisticians she had worked with, the kind of people who earned their positions through years of early mornings and late nights and correct calls under pressure. They were carrying documents. They were walking with purpose. They were headed toward the council chamber. She passed a guard who had been holding doors for her all week. He did not hold the door. He nodded the way he had nodded at her for years, before the presentation, the professional acknowledgement of a ranking officer. The door stayed where it was. She opened it herself. The room was different. The grand carved chairs with their iron backs and their century of inherited weight were gone. She stood in the doorway and looked at the space where they had been. The chairs that Dennis and Grant and Harvey had sat in, the chairs that had been inherited and appointed and politically gifted, the chairs that had been filled by men who knew someone rather than men who had done something. Gone. In their place, 12 plain oak chairs, solidly built, the kind you earned by sitting in them. The people in those chairs were people she knew. A captain from the 3rd Patrol who had held the Grey March crossing in a flood and never received a commendation because she did not have the right connections. A trade negotiator who had closed the Southern Valley Agreement at 26 and been passed over for counsel because his family name was not old enough. a logistician from the armory who had quietly redesigned the supply chain and saved the crown 40,000 marks in a single year, and had never once sat at this table. And at the far end, India. The Omega from the Eastern Patrol. Iron cuff on her wrist, 8 years of field service. The kind of competence that did not require a designation to be visible. An Omega at the council table, in a chair that fit. Felicity's throat tightened. He had not just rewritten a section, he had rebuilt the room. He had looked at the table she had sat at for 11 years, and he had seen what she had seen but never said, that half the chairs were filled by men who had not earned them, and the one chair that belonged to someone who had was the one they tried to take away. And he had fixed it. Not with a speech, not with a grand declaration, with 12 plain oak chairs and 12 people who deserved to sit in them. At the head of the table, his chair was empty. Eldon was standing beside it. He was not sitting. He was standing to its left, with his hands behind his back and his jaw set and the amber in his eyes steady. And his face was the real one, not managed, not performed, just Eldon. The man who counted her wins and kept her ink and stood in councils and said, "It changes nothing," and meant it. He looked at her. He looked at the chair. He did not say a word. "Oh," Charity said, and then nothing. No sarcasm, no catalogue, no 11 years, just, "Oh." He was offering her the head of the table, the king's seat. He was standing beside it because he was not asking her to join him. He was asking her to lead, and he would stand next to her while she did. She walked to the chair. She looked at it. She looked at him. Pine resin and warm stone and honey between them, blended, indistinguishable. "That is your chair," she said. "It is the chair of whoever earns it. You earned it. And you earned the right to be in this room, in any seat you choose." She pulled the chair to his right, her place, the place she had always held, the position from which she had run the eastern border and argued about ridgelines and been right 48 times more than him. She sat down, at the table, in a chair that was hers. He sat in his chair. She was at his right hand, the way she had always been, except the table was new, and the faces were new, and the charter was new, and the ground was solid under all of it. "Ours," Anthony said, quiet, tender, certain. The same word 11 years later finally landed. Chapter 5. The Bond. She found him in his study that evening. The fire was burning. Her chair was waiting. The room smelled like pine resin and warm stone and the faint ghost of honey, her scent, absorbed into the fabric of the chair where she had sat for 1,000 evenings. He had not aired the room. He had been sitting in her scent. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to hear it." He waited. He was in the chair across from hers, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. Not managed. Open. The fire was low and the amber was in his eyes, and he was looking at her with the expression she had been learning to read, the real one, the one underneath all the versions he wore for the council and the court and the kingdom, the one that was just a man, tired and certain and in love with a woman he had been in love with for 8 years and had called it Data. "I presented as Beta at 17. I walked into your council chamber at 19. I was good at this from the first day," she paused, "and I was falling apart last week. For the first time in my life, I did not know what I was. The floor was gone. Everything I had built felt like it was standing on a designation instead of standing on me, and I could not tell the difference." She looked at her hands, steady now, not shaking. "And you came to my quarters with a patrol folio and told me I was ahead by 47 and that you had rearranged furniture to be closer to me. You did not tell me I was fine. You did not tell me the designation did not matter. You told me I was right, specifically, with numbers. Her throat tightened. And that was the thing that made the ground come back. Not the veto, not the standing. The counting. The fact that you had been paying attention for 8 years and you could prove it. Something in his jaw loosened. Not the muscle, something deeper. Something structural. Something that had been clenched since the day she walked into his council chamber at 19 and Anthony had said, ours, and he had spent 11 years building an architecture of distance around a word he could not stop his wolf from saying. I moved you closer in the second year, he said. His voice cracked, quiet and real. The way a voice cracks when it is being used for something it has never been used for. I kept your ink for 9 years. I stayed every evening. I counted every time you were right because watching you be right was the best part of my day. And I could not say that, so I made it data. He stopped. His hands were on his knees, and they were open, and his eyes were dark and wet and amber. I have been in love with you since your 3rd year. I filed it under every category except the correct one. Acoustics, benchmarking, efficiency, situational awareness. He paused. I ran out of categories. She reached across the space. She took his face in her hands, both sides, thumbs at the hinge of his jaw where the muscle lived that she had been watching for 11 years. She kissed his mouth, slow. The kind of kiss that says, I have seen every version of you and I am choosing all of them. His hands came to her, one at her back, one at her jaw. The managed version was gone, had been gone for days. There was just Eldon, the man who counted her wins and kept her ink and rearranged chairs and stood in front of councils and said, it changes nothing, because to him it never had. She kissed him until the fire burned low and the gold light faded to amber, and the honey and the pine between them were indistinguishable. And Anthony said, ours, and Charity said, his, and neither of them filed it under anything except what it was. His forehead against hers, both breathing. The study smelled like both of them now, pine and honey, inseparable, the scent of 2 people who had been in the same rooms for 11 years and had finally stopped pretending the rooms were the reason. Stay, he said, not a command, a request. The first time the king had ever asked for anything. I am not going anywhere, she said. I have never been going anywhere. I have been right here for 11 years. I know, he said. I was counting. 6 months later, the title was Luna. The role was chief advisor. She held both the way she held everything, with her whole hands and no apology. The council had stopped blinking at the combination 3 months ago, around the time she resolved the Southern Valley trade dispute in a single session, and then adjusted the king's collar on the way out of the chamber without breaking stride. Nobody held her doors anymore. Nobody offered to carry her document case. They had learned. The new council met on a Thursday morning in autumn. 12 seats, all earned. India had proposed a revision to the Eastern Patrol that was, Felicity had to admit, better than hers. She was ahead by 53 now. Eldon was still counting. She found him in his study that evening. The fire was burning. Her chair was beside his, not across from it anymore, beside it. He had moved it in the 3rd month without comment, and she had not commented on the not commenting. I want to do something, she said. He looked up from the charter amendment he was drafting. The amber was in his eyes. It was always in his eyes now. He had stopped managing it. He had stopped managing most things around her, which meant his jaw was looser, and his hands were open, and his collar was still wrong on the left side every single morning. And she still straightened it every single morning, and neither of them pretended it was professional anymore. The mark, she said. He went still. Not the managed still, the other kind, the kind that meant every part of him was listening. I wanted to wait, she said. I wanted to be sure that when it happened it was because I chose it, not because the biology arrived and the bond pulled and we fell into it. I wanted 6 months of choosing you on purpose, every day, as myself. Both versions, the beta and the omega, and whatever I am now, which is both. She sat down beside him. She took his hand. The scar on his knuckle was familiar under her thumb. 6 months of holding this hand. 6 months of mornings at the table and evenings in this study, and the slow, specific work of building something that was not a career or a title, but a life. She had earned this the way she earned everything, through time and presence and the daily decision to stay. I am sure, she said. He turned to her. His hand came to her jaw, gentle, the way he had learned to touch her, not careful, not managed, just present. His eyes were dark brown and amber and full of the thing he had stopped filing under categories and started just feeling. He kissed her, slow. Then his mouth went to her shoulder, the curve of her neck, and she tilted her head and put her hand on the back of his and said yes, the way she had said it the first time she walked into a council chamber, quietly, certainly, knowing exactly what she was choosing. The bite. Gentle and precise, and then not precise at all. The bond completing, not like something new arriving, but like something old finally being named. 11 years and 6 months of shared rooms and shared maps and shared evenings, given a shape and a warmth and a mark that would stay. She felt it settle, a compass finding north, the honey and the pine merging into their scent, the one the corridors and the study and the strategy room had been building toward. The mark was warm on her skin, and it was different from the iron cuff she had worn for 9 years. The cuff said she belonged in a room, the mark said she belonged to a person, and the person belonged to her. And both of them had chosen this with 11 years of evidence and 6 months of deliberation, and not a single category left to hide behind. His forehead dropped against her shoulder. She held him, her hand in his hair, his pulse through the mark, slow and settled. Hours, Anthony said, the quietest he had ever said it, the most certain. Charity said nothing at all, and the nothing was the loudest tenderness she had ever felt. Friday morning, council. Eldon leaned toward her, close, the proximity that had been managed for 11 years and was not managed anymore. You have ink on your collar, he said. She looked. She did not have ink on her collar. She looked at him. He was studying the map with the composure of a man who had absolutely not just invented a stain to close a 3-inch gap. You do not have ink on your collar, he said, without looking up. I apologize for the inaccuracy. Entry 47, Charity said. Category, fabricated textile emergencies. He has been doing this twice a week for 6 months. His catalog of imaginary stains is now longer than the charter. I am going to be dining on this for the rest of recorded history. Felicity straightened his collar. Left side, her fingers at his throat, his pulse under her thumb, the mark warm on her shoulder under the wool, the room full of people who could see, and neither of them caring. Luna, chief advisor. Both things, neither canceling the other. Your collar is fine, she said. I know, he said. And the thing at the corner of his mouth, the thing she had filed under professional rapport for 11 years, and had been calling by its real name for 6 months, lasted and did not go away.